So welcome everybody to Atlas Survey 4. Just want to confirm we are recording this session.
Yes.
Okay. This survey will cover 3 elements of Atlas, but actual 4 parts of a survey: characterization, incidence, and pathways. I'm going to give the same spiel I gave from the other survey introductions, which is just a quick summary of what Atlas is, what our 3x and 4x planning is, what we're needing from the community. We will review the survey, last week's survey responses, and I will introduce survey 4. So Atlas is a web-based application enabling non-programmers to design and fully specify elements that can be used in observational studies. It's our primary interface for developing and evaluating cohort definitions. Functions included vocabulary searching, concept set creation, cohort definitions, characterization functions, which we'll talk about today, and other analytics like population level estimation and patient level prediction. Development status of Atlas and Web API from a 3x and 4x perspective. The 2x line is at end of development. We will be releasing 2.15 in the next coming weeks. It will be maintained for current users and hot fixes will be accepted. The 3x is under development right now based on community feedback. This is where the current surveys that I'll be talking about is going to be used to identify what we're going to carry forward and also perform technical updates that are required for being able to maintain another round of software, which includes like JDK updates and other dependencies. The 4.x will make changes to the application design based on user interviews and data collection by Data for Life. So what we need from you is we'll be showing you a set of features in Atlas 2x, specifically 2.14, and we need your input about frequency and user importance of the features. When we say frequency, we mean it's a feature that you never use, rarely use, sometimes use, or often use, based on 25% of the time or greater than 75% of the time kind of thing. And then how important the feature is. If the feature is not important to your work, all the way up to the feature is critical and cannot be ignored in your tasks. Feedback from these surveys will determine which aspects of the application get priority. So last week's presentation by Rich gave us a walkthrough of concept set and cohort definitions, 2 very important and frequently used features that we learned from survey 1 as far as a high-level use of Atlas. The third survey delved into more specific features in concept sets and cohort definitions. On the concept set side, building concept sets and reviewing included concepts is frequently and important, which makes complete sense. Excuse me. Looking at what the included source codes are is something that is not as frequently considered, but still very important. The recommended feature, which was a relatively recent addition to Atlas, is not seeing frequent use, but is considered relatively important. The explore evidence, which is used to create negative controls from concept set expressions, is something that is not necessarily something that's a hot feature that's used in Atlas frequently, but there is a good number of people that chose to rate it as important in some way. Exporting and importing are 2 very important features for sending stuff to other systems or other collaborators or receiving what they are doing into your own. Comparing comparing concept sets between each other is something that is relatively frequently used, but is considered an important feature. Same thing can be said with versions. Messages less frequent, less important as the versioning and comparisons. Optimization is something that people do use and is considered important. And just as a side note, Martin Schuming has come up with a potential implementation of further optimization, which we are going to see if we can slide into the 2.15 release, depending on the risk. And then finally, being able to tag concept sets is not considered a frequent or important thing to do, but there are people out there that do consider it such. On the cohort definition side, creating them and is frequently done and important. Concept sets, as in concept sets that are cohort specific. This is a very nuanced question. Hopefully the responders recognize that This is talking about cohorts, concept sets that are created for purpose specifically in the cohort definition. So you go into the cohort definition, click new concept set, and you just build it there, versus importing concept sets from the repository, which is pretty universally frequent and important. So it does look like the distinction was understood there. Reviewing generation results and inclusion results is a frequent and important function. Samples could kind of go either way, not necessarily very frequently used, but is considered important. And this will lead into that viewing profiles. The cohort reports, known as Heracles reports, not frequently used, but hit and miss on as far as the importance. The print-friendly view is not as much frequently used as not considered balanced as far as importance versus not importance. Exporting the graphical view using the graphical view is not that frequently or importantly considered. Cohort generation SQL does seem to have frequency of use, but very important. And I can understand this. This is how people who raise questions about why they may or may not be seeing certain people in their populations, they can see the actual cohort SQL to diagnose it. Exporting and importing from JSON is a important feature, again, for the same reasons as concept sets, so a good mechanism to collaborate. Versioning is a frequently used and important function. People do use the messages and consider them important. And tagging is similar pattern in our concept sets where tags are not necessarily something that is applied to cohort definitions on a frequent use or considered important capability to do so. Okay, so that is a run through. I am going to attempt to submit an abstract to OHDSI to basically digest all the surveys and present the results as a poster presentation. So if it does get accepted, I will see you at the symposium and we can discuss more in detail some of the other general themes and plans that we can make off the survey. Okay. Moving on to survey 4, your boy is going to give you a demonstration on characterization, incidence, and pathways. There are 4 main parts of survey 4, so it's going to be a little bit longer. The first 2 elements are with characterization in the sense that you can create custom features that you can then apply to populations for characterization. So I will give you a quick run through of what a custom feature is. Then I'll talk about characterization and how the proportions and distribution of population features are calculated in a target population. Then we will move through an incidence rate example that will calculate rates of an outcome among the target population cohort. And then we'll show a cohort pathway, which aggregates sequences of event cohorts E among target cohorts. So going to go through the survey, the demo. What I'm going to do first is just give you a little bit of context about the exercise that I'm doing, one theme that will carry through the characterization, incidence, and pathway designs that I'm going to show. What I decided to do was I use Gen AI to kind of have some suggestions about disease that might be a good example using OMOP CDM and Atlas. ChatGPT actually knows what Atlas is. It was kind of freaky, but I've decided to go through an example of inflammatory bowel disease condition comparison between ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. So they're both inflammatory bowel diseases, often treated similarly and seen by similar specialists. The differences is disease location, the extraintestinal manifestations, the medication use, and surgical history. So it'll be nice to show sort of the clinical nuance and how similar IBD diseases can or how similar ICD codes can lead to different real-world patterns. But we'll of course be using SNOMED for that. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to our characterization. We are now focused on the characterization nav of Atlas. I'm going to jump over to the features that are selected here. The 2 that we'll be talking about is just a custom feature that has a UC and UD Crohn's disease prior conditions. But before we get into the details of that, to orient you, there are, as part of characterization, there's 105 preset analyses that you can apply to a population. This comes directly from feature extraction. That's why they're presets and they're defined by what feature extraction does. Feature extraction is beyond the scope about getting into that, but those exist. And then I created
Chris,
3. Yes.
Would you mind just maximizing the screen? It's just a little bit hard to read because it's like only like a small portion of your screen.
Sure thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in like this.
Yeah, that looks much better. Thank you.
Yes. And I'll be shrinking it later because as we get into the tabular stuff, it's stretched across the left side of the screen. So we'll see how this looks. But I'm glad. Thank you for calling that out. We'll see how if everybody can see this clearly. Okay. So again, we're talking about features that are applied to target populations to understand proportions of features in a population. The presets ones are pre-exist and you can choose them when you create your characterization. We'll talk about creating a new feature. When you create a new feature, you have to specify if it is a criteria, meaning it's sort of like cohort criteria logic. So I'm going to call this criteria logic for building a feature. You say if it's a prevalence type or a custom feature type. Criteria will use the domain criteria that you know about from cohort definitions. A distribution will use similar criteria. However, when you use a distribution, you specify what you want to get a distribution of, either the count of the people that had it. You can use, if there is a duration to the event, you can get different distributions on duration, either the average duration per person or the maximum duration from all people, the minimum duration for all people. You can get a distribution of what those are. In addition to these criteria custom features that you can create a custom feature that's based on SQL. We provide a template to basically paste in. And this is, again, not going to get into a tutorial on how to build SQL, but the point is that you can create features using SQL expressions to generate the features that then get reported in the characterization tool. So to show exactly what this is for this particular example with the ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, I asked ChatGPT what are some common things that would potentially be precursors to a diagnosis of this. They came up with some IBD symptoms. We have fatigue and arthropathy. So I have made a group of features, 3 of them, that I'm going to apply to my characterization, and we'll show how that results pans out. So going to just close this now and say that's going to be the first part of the survey. We'll talk about your use, if you do use them, how frequently you use them, how important they are of using those styles of custom features. Okay, now we'll jump into the characterization. I'm going to show 2 examples because one has subgroups and one does not have subgroups, and there's little nuances between them. For just the regular Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis characterization. In this case, you have a designer, a characterization designer. It lets you say what are the cohorts you want to characterize, what are the feature analyses you want to apply to the characterization. In this case, just clicking import, I can choose either by domain or the type of preset or criteria, custom criteria cohort features that I used to import into the design. So once you make your selections and you import them, they become in this list. So I'm going to be doing a couple of drug, couple of condition, and my custom features for this. I am not going to show you subgroups for this design. I'll do it in the other, because the nuance between subgroups and non-subgroup characterizations is when you have subgroups, it actually makes a lot more columns in the table. So cohort comparison functions are disabled when you're in a subgrouping mode. So we're just going to show this analysis without that, so I can show you the cohort comparison function. And then I'll jump over to the subgroups and I'll show you how the subgroups manifest in these reports. So on this designer, once you have specified all these inputs, you also, if you are using subgroups, they reference concept sets because they're using that cohort criteria logic. So there's concepts there, but we're not in this case. So we'll just move past this tab. We can execute the design against your common data model sources. When you have done it multiple times, you actually in generation can look at different versions of your design and historical generations. So that is a function we will ask about in the survey. And I'm just going to go through these two tabs before we drill into the report, just to cover the tabs. There are utilities for importing and exporting your characterization design to export and import. Every time you make a save, there is a version created, and there is a validation system that will check various rules and give you warnings and messages based on potential issues that it finds with your design. So jumping now into the main meat of why you do your characterization is the reports. I'll use the latest results here. So the report shows a filter panel allowing you to filter by which cohort you want to see, which analyses, which was the from your characterization design, which analyses you wanted to turn on, turn off. If each feature or collection of features may be associated to a certain domain, so you can turn on and off like those domains. So the whole first panel is just about filtering the results into, a focus element, but we're not going to filter anything yet. So the first table shows basically across all the domains, all the prevalences of not prevalence, but proportions of these features that were found in your population. So I'm just going to breeze through here. We can see that inflammation is something that's very prevalent, or at least very frequent has high proportion in your population. The next tables are basically for each analysis. So we did the drug era, long and short term. We did condition era, short and long term. And finally, at the bottom, we have my custom analysis or custom features that I put in here for the prior conditions that I was curious, talking about sort of groups of codes, whereas the features work at a very individual code level. Fatigue covers lots of code, IBD symptoms covers lots of code. So custom features is a way to let you group these features together or codes together into one concept, one clinical concept, so to speak, that will give you like any fatigue, any IBD symptoms. We can see prior to their first diagnosis of either Crohn's, or in this case, it's Crohn's disease, only 7.39 actually had a record of like a prior IBD symptom prior to that, according to this report. Second and last thing I'll show here, as far as the feature goes, is when you select, I'm sorry, that was ulcerative colitis, by the way. When you select two cohorts, it will set up a comparison view of the report. Again, the tables are in the same order, but you will see a visualization and a new column. So to orient you to the table, it's the same covariate, what the name of the covariate is, how many people, what the percentage of the population had it. Now, though, the table has additional columns showing you with one cohort versus the other cohort. It will calculate a standard difference mean based on a binary covariate calculation, and it will show this frequency plot that shows you the proportion in one cohort versus the other cohort. One axis is the one cohort proportion, the other axis is the other cohort proportion. And if it's along the 45-degree line, then you have similar sort of proportions of these covariates. You can see there are ones that are off the line, so very prevalent or not prevalent in one cohort or the other. And we can see it all together. You can see it again, same way. If you just are looking at the drug table, you can see, as I said earlier, the treatment is kind of similar between these bowel diseases. You can see at the short-term level, just want to do this so we can see it. Short-term level, similar. And then we have our custom features also can contribute that type of, just scroll to the bottom. I'm sorry for my scroll. I just have to set this to 10 so it's a little easier to get through it. And here are our three custom features that we put together that you can see that arthropathy is kind of like seen in one population a little bit higher than the other. So ulcerative colitis seems to have a little bit higher arthropathy type of coding compared to Crohn's disease, just in this example. Okay, so that is sort of a run through of the type of features and functions that you're going to be asked about in characterization. Hopefully I didn't bias you guys too much about focusing on any particular use case, but I did want to just show from a cohort comparison, selection of the type of analyses, creating the features, all that stuff that's going to be questioned about. Now, the other element of characterization is using subgroups. And like I said earlier, because I wanted to show cohort comparison, when you have subgroups, it's not enabled, because you'll see why in a second. So I'm going to jump through to the subgroup one. And same arrangement of analyses and targets to analyze. But in this case, we created a subgroup. I actually didn't use a subgroup that dealt with concept sets, so like looking for prior conditions or something like that. I just decided to break up the cohorts into gender and age. So I have one group for females, one group for males, and one group for adults. And so what we'll see in the result is how those subgroups are reported. So I'll show the latest results here. Okay, so now even just showing one cohort, which is the ulcerative colitis one, you can see that the three subgroups, you see the main overall percentage counts, and then each individual subgroup's counts and percentage. Again, it works the same way, where if you can go look at the drugs, same way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'll just scroll to the bottom to show that it also handles the my custom features here, right? So arthropathy, fatigue, IBD symptoms. You can see the subgroups, male, female, adults. But now if we add another cohort to the mix, it will give you a table. And it will give you a way to sort by a standard difference across the general population, not the individual subgroups. But as you can see, now that you've kind of doubled your columns, the table just seemed to get too wide, and the decision was made that we're not going to show the cohort comparison plotting across all the different subgroups because it would be a little bit messy. So just calling that out as a nuance, but I'm not sure how many people have delved into using subgroups and whatever, but this is how it functions in the tool. So please provide your own feedback on your use of it, your frequency of it, and how important that particular function is for characterization. Okay, I'm not sure if I should stop for questions because, like I said, all this is doing is to give into your mind the focus of what the survey is. So we're not really here to give a tutorial and answer questions about how do you do this or that. So I'm actually just going to kind of move on to the next part of the presentation, which is going to be on incidence. So on the same vein of this example of looking at some comparisons and differences between Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, what I did here was I defined these cohorts as from earliest event of the diagnosis to end of observation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just look for these 5 outcomes of interest. The rationale behind these is that having these type of outcomes could indicate like severity. If more and more of these things are happening to you, then you probably have a more serious health state. The time in the designer of the incidence rates, going from the left to right tabs, you have your editor, which lets you define which targets and outcomes you want to include. You can specify your time at risk, specify a study window, and you can define your own stratification criteria. In this example, I created one stratification using the same constructs of criteria logic to say age is greater than 17, and if you're male. Notice I didn't do if you're female in this case because stratification is binary, so we'll be able to know like adults and children. Basically, if they're not an adult, well, we can say they're children. If they're not male, we'll just say they're female, that kind of thing. So you can use these strata to do like the yes/no binary kind of stuff between these choices. In the survey, you'll be asked if you create incidence rate designs without going into, do you specify a time at risk? Do you specify a study window? We don't get into that level of detail for the designing perspective, but we do ask you about if you use strata. We'll glance over the concept sets because, again, because we're dealing with cohort criteria here, there could be concept sets involved. So that we have a concept set viewer here, but we're not going to talk about that. And you're not going to be asked about concept sets in the survey. Generation is where you will generate and view results together. We will come back to this tab because this is where we're going to dig into the reports. But the other functions that we'll ask you about is importing, exporting, and viewing SQL. So you actually, in this case, will see the analytic SQL that generates the incidence rates. Versions is something that is also handled in instance rates. So do you use the versioning function of incidence rates? And there's a messaging system that will do little logical checks on your design and give you messages. Okay, looking at the generation. In the generation, there was a conscious decision to not give you a full table of all the T's, all the O's in your population, because at the time of this design, when we produced this reporting scheme, we wanted to downplay comparing incidence rates across populations or across outcomes. It might lead to improper comparison, even though you can export the CSV and see it all together. From a reporting perspective, you choose a target, you choose an outcome, and you will see the rate in this report at the bottom. So it is a one-at-a-time selection, and you're just asking a specific question and getting a specific answer. What is the perforation of intestine among ulcerative colitis? 24 cases within 1,800 people. Here's the time at risk, and here's the rate. However, we can also see a report that breaks down the stratification. You will be asked about this in the survey. It is showing you each strata that you specified independently. So in the adults, there was 1,700 people, 23 cases. This is the rate for that. Males had this, but you also get a visualization heat map view that works similar to the inclusion rule report, if you recall from cohort definitions. But this will kind of give you a heat map showing you by hovering over it, this group, because on the left, you see none of those were highlighted in red, meaning this is male, this is adult. This one is adult, but is not male. So these are the adult female groups. Interestingly, there is in the stratification, there is a higher rate in this particular substrata. And this is the substrata where you are not adult, but male. So male boys seem to have in this group exhibiting a higher rate. This isn't a causal statement. It's just giving you some information about how the incidence rates kind of break down within the strata of your population. Okay, so that incidence rates actually doesn't have a lot of functionality to it, a lot of choices that users can make. So that is all I need to say about incidence rates. Hopefully you'll be able to go through the survey and answer any questions that we propose on those. And then finally, we'll go to pathways. Again, keeping on the same theme. So we saw in our incidence rate example, 2 target populations with those 5 outcomes, and we saw independently what are the individual rates of that. But another idea for using pathways is how people might have multiple outcomes within the population and a certain order of what those outcomes may have. So I've created 2 pathways. For lack of time, I was going to show IBD treatment stuff pathway, but instead, just to keep it on theme, we'll just take those outcomes that we used in incidence rates and see how they can be used in a pathway. So in the pathway designer, you choose your target populations again. For the event cohorts, these are the things that we would like to see the sequence of among the target population. I just happen to use the same cohorts for the outcomes as the event cohorts. You have some choices about analysis settings. We do not ask in the survey about specific analysis settings. We're just basically ask if you're designing pathway analyses. Execution works similarly, where you have we saw in characterization, where you have we have versions of each generation, and you can view the report here. We will dig into the report in a moment, but instead we're going to just finish the tabs in the editor. You have import export functions. We will ask you if you import and export. Versioning is similar. Do you use versioning to go back to prior versions, or if you look at prior versions of pathway analyses? And there's a messaging system that will do validation logic checks and give you messages about things that could be an issue in your design. So taking a look at the pathway analysis for this, we have the 2 cohorts, ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. First one at the top is ulcerative colitis. We can see that we had the 1,800 people in the population. And in this result, we're seeing GI bleed is the first diagnosis that seems to come up. but also has perforations and intestinal fistula. And you can see how there are some people where there is a, you can click on the thing and see the detail. Certain people, one person had a very bad time and had a lot of these things happening all together through their period of having this diagnosis. Comparing that to Crohn's disease, which is below it, less proportional had the GI bleed and split across the other outcomes of interest that we had. But you can see that there was a progression, and many people, however, just started with GI bleed and ended with their thing. So that's kind of, in this case, this is what we're getting from the pathway analysis as far as outcomes of interest. So again, you'll be asked on the survey about just using the visualizations, but there's also a tabular view. And I'll just quickly run through what these tables are and then conclude the demo. So focusing on the first cohort's report, the first table shows just basically the sunburst data in raw form. So 5 steps with each count and what each step was. The second table doesn't care about what the prior parent was. So the first one's all about sequential steps. The second one is basically, what was the thing that happened in the first step? Like, what is the proportion of things that happened in the first step? What was the proportion of things that happened in the second step, regardless of what their parent was? So you can see here in the first, like if we sort by rank here, like these are the things that we saw in the first step and what the proportion of the cohort had that. And these are the things that happened in the second step, but not caring about what was in the first step. So these are the things that were just isolated to the second step of a sequence. So that's just an interesting way to basically say, just to reiterate, the first one's very step specific. The second one is very individual step specific. The third one tells you, looking at the event cohorts, just what is their presence in the pathway. So regardless of steps, it's just asking you what was present in your pathway from an event cohort perspective. And then finally, this is a count of people that had basically the distinct count of event cohorts. So these mental people had 1,300 had none of the event cohorts that were in the pathway. 497 had exactly 1. A certain number had exactly 2, exactly 3, exactly 4, etc. Just giving you kind of some examples of how distinctive are these sequences in your pathway in your population. So we will in the survey ask you about those 4 tables. And I believe if we ask you about those 4 tables, I guess I'll walk through the survey next and find out. But basically, primarily, though, we're asking if you frequency of use of the visualizations and frequently of use of the tabular form. So that concludes the 3 functions demo for characterization, incidence, and pathways. Hopefully, I wasn't talking too quickly and all this is clear. I will jump into the survey real quick, just to show you what to expect there. You'll answer if you're a user. It'll give you a description of what frequency and importance means. First section is going to be talking about the feature analysis section that I talked about first, which will talk about the pre-specified analyses, the custom SQL analyses, a proportional feature or a distribution feature. So you'll be asked if you write those features, if you create those features, and frequency of importance of creating those type of features. The second one will focus on the characterization, design, and execution. So that's broken down into the designer, how subgrouping works, if you use feature analysis parameters, which I didn't really show a demo of, but it's there and we'll ask about it in the survey. Just a way to provide user-defined values to override the start day and end day of feature extraction. We'll ask about execution, which means, do you use history and do you look at the reports and how you filter, utilities for importing and exporting, and versioning if you version your tools, your assets, like the characterization design. So quick series of questions there on just do you create, do you subgroup, and how you use the analysis parameters, your execution, utilities, versions, and tags. Same thing about importance. Then we move into characterization reporting. This is where we'll show you the filter panels, the tabular views, and the comparison and the plots. So there'll be questions about if you filter, how you use comparison, do you use subgroups, and if it is important, frequency and importance again. That's going to make me answer all these questions. Okay, on the incidence, then we jump over to, we're done with characterization, onto incidence. Same type of thing. There's the designer and a report. We're going to ask questions about elements of the designer, elements of reports, utilities that you use, and if you're using version and tagging. So we'll just go through that. Cool. Then there's an open question about what features are missing from Incidence that would be useful. Finally, we'll get into cohort pathways. There's not a lot of nuance to the functionality. It's just create it and view the results. But we do ask you, we don't ask you about the specific tables, but we do ask you to tell us visualization versus tabular. So you might design stuff often, you might use the visualizations all the time, but not really look at the tables at all. And then you'll just answer it that way as far as frequency. But even though you don't use it frequently, maybe all of it's important. And then you can answer some questions about what features you'd like to see in the pathways. And that's it. After that, general question, open questions about Atlas. If you want to provide your email address so that you can be contacted if you want to get engaged with the community or the work group about these features, and you submit that, and we will report back next week what people's responses were. So that's it. Thank you all very much for your attention.
Thank you, Chris, for going through that. That was, you went through a lot of content very quickly. One thing that I just want to reinforce to the community, it's super important for you to fill out this particular survey. And one thing that I think I'll just reinforce for why Chris was going through this, we're kind of at a crossroads as it relates to our open source development as a community. We're developing lots of important analytic capabilities, and some of them have matured quite a lot, like, for example, within our Hades packages. Chris, for example, is the maintainer of our cohort incidence package in R, which is part of our Strategist framework and is part of all the studies we've been running, just like, Cindy's study that she mentioned earlier. And we've reached this bit of a fork in the road that Atlas currently has some descriptive characterization features, like what Chris highlighted with characterization, incidence, and cohort pathways. We have similar capabilities through our Hades R packages in Strategist. And part of the reason we're doing these surveys is because we really need to know where we should be investing our time and effort as a development community, and how do we decide whether or not we keep going down this path we're on right now, which I would strongly assert isn't a very good path, which is that we've got two parallel things that are going on that are not keeping up with each other. We are separately building analytic capabilities in the Atlas platform and separately building R packages, and they don't have the same feature functionality. Or we make a decision about we're prioritizing one or the other. And so based on survey 1, what we heard from you all is that there is a huge amount of use of Atlas in terms of vocabulary exploration and concept set building and cohort definitions, and we largely expected that. The other area, which we're actually not even going to do a session to talk on, but you all were pretty unanimous in highlighting, is that people are, for the most part, not using Atlas to design estimation and prediction studies, and that's good because we're way out of date as it relates to what Atlas was doing versus what we're doing in Hades with the Strategist workflow. So those are certainly functions that need to go away in Atlas in a future release so that everybody really embraces how we are conducting evidence at scale with Strategist. But this topic today, characterization, is this area where I'm really, I think we need to hear from the community. You need to respond to the surveys to give us your input about, are you using characterization? Where do you want to do characterization? How do you want to do characterization? It's a really important thing, because I could imagine we're at a point now where there's two extremes and everything in between. One extreme is, let's remove all these characterization functions from Atlas because they're redundant with what we're doing in Strategist, and currently the survey says most of you aren't actually using it very regularly. So we can just remove these things altogether. The other extreme is to say, hey, characterization is a really important, valuable thing that non-programmers want to do through an interface. Let's double down and invest in that space. And so those are very different perspectives. And the only way that we as a development team can decide where to go is by getting the user community to provide us input and feedback. So it's really essential for us to hear about your experience in conducting characterization analysis in Atlas and to provide us your input and feedback so that the survey input that we get for this week is very, very directly going to define where we go with Atlas moving forward. So appreciate all your input up to the surveys this point, and really want to reinforce why we need you to do this one to continue to provide the input we need.